Some people don't leave their families because they're heartless, they leave because staying slowly erased them. There's a kind of silence that doesn't sound like anything, but it weighs on your chest like a storm that never breaks. It's the silence of not being understood in a room full of people who are supposed to know you best. The silence of swallowing your truth just to keep the peace. The silence of realizing home doesn't feel like home. And if you've ever felt that, you already know, cutting off family isn't a sudden decision. It's not one argument, one mistake, or one bad day. It's something that builds quietly, like emotional erosion. Drop by drop, year by year. From the outside, people see distance and call it cruelty. They say things like, "But they're your family." As if blood alone is enough to sustain a connection, as if DNA automatically guarantees safety, respect, or love. But what they don't see is the invisible wall that was built long before the distance ever happened. Because sometimes, the people who were supposed to be your safe place became the place you had to protect yourself from. It often begins in childhood, in ways so subtle they're easy to dismiss. Not all wounds come from obvious harm. Some come from what never happened. The comfort that was never given, the validation that never came. The moments when you needed to be seen and weren't. Psychologists sometimes call this emotional neglect, a kind of absence that teaches a child a dangerous lesson. Your feelings don't matter. Not directly, not loudly, but through patterns. Through being ignored when you cried. Through being dismissed when you spoke. Through being misunderstood so often that you eventually stopped trying to explain yourself at all. It's like growing up next to an empty well. You keep going back, hoping this time there will be water. Hoping this time someone will understand, listen, care. But every time you lower the bucket it comes back empty, and so you adapt. You become quieter, smaller, easier to handle. You learn to read the room before you express yourself. You learn that love is conditional, that it must be earned through obedience, silence, or perfection. You learn that who you are is too much or not enough, but never quite right. This is how the invisible wall begins to form. Not out of anger, but out of survival. As you grow older, that wall doesn't disappear, it evolves. It becomes the tension you feel every time you're around them, the way your body stiffens before a conversation even begins, the way your words feel rehearsed, filtered, controlled. Because deep down, a part of you is still that child standing at the empty well, hoping this time will be different. But it rarely is. Instead, the patterns repeat. The same dismissiveness, the same misunderstandings, the same emotional distance. And each time it happens, something inside you cracks just a little more, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to make you question your own reality. This is where something called ambiguous loss begins to take shape. It's a strange kind of grief. Because the people you're grieving are still alive. They're still there, physically present, but emotionally, they were never fully there to begin with. You're mourning a relationship that never truly existed in the way you needed it to. And that kind of grief is confusing. It makes you doubt yourself. It makes you wonder if you're being too sensitive, too dramatic, too ungrateful. So you stay. You keep showing up. You keep trying. You keep giving chances that feel less like hope and more like habit. Because walking away from family doesn't just feel like loss. It feels like betrayal. Not just betraying them, but betraying the version of yourself that still believes things could change. But over time, something shifts. The exhaustion becomes heavier than the guilt. You start noticing how drained you feel after every interaction. How your energy disappears in spaces that are supposed to refill it. How you leave conversations feeling smaller, misunderstood, or invisible. And slowly, almost quietly, a realization begins to form. What if the problem isn't me? It's a dangerous thought, especially if you were raised to believe that keeping the family together was your responsibility. But it's also the beginning of something important, because when you start questioning the role you were forced to play, you begin to see the patterns more clearly. Maybe you were the peacekeeper, always smoothing things over, even at your own expense. Maybe you were the invisible one. The one who learned not to need anything. Or maybe you were the problem. The one blamed for speaking truths others didn't want to hear. Families, especially unhealthy ones, often assign roles like this without ever saying it out loud. And once you're in that role, stepping out of it doesn't just cause discomfort, it disrupts the entire system. Because systems resist change. The moment you start setting boundaries, saying no, or expressing your needs, it can feel like everything starts to push back. You're suddenly labeled as difficult, distant, or disrespectful. Not because you've changed into something worse, but because you've stopped being what they were comfortable with. And that's when the pressure intensifies. The guilt, the obligation, the subtle reminders of everything they've done for you. The unspoken rule that family must always come first, no matter the cost. But what happens when the cost is your mental health? What happens when staying connected means staying in a cycle that slowly breaks you down? This is the part people don't talk about enough, the internal war. Because cutting off family isn't just about distance. It's about dismantling years of conditioning. It's about facing the fear that maybe, just maybe, you're making the wrong choice. You question everything. Am I overreacting? Maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe I should just try harder. And underneath all those questions is a deeper fear. If I let go of them, who do I even become? Because family, no matter how painful, is still a part of your identity. Walking away can feel like stepping into the unknown without a map. But here's the truth most people don't realize. The decision to distance yourself doesn't come from a lack of love. It comes from a lifetime of loving without being met halfway. It comes from giving chances until there are none left to give. It comes from realizing that staying isn't healing anything. It's only repeating something. And maybe the hardest part of all is accepting that some people will never understand your decision. They'll see your distance, but not the years of pain that led to it. They'll judge your silence, but not the countless times you tried to speak. Because from the outside, it looks like you walked away, but from the inside it feels like you finally stopped abandoning yourself. And yet, even with that clarity, the feeling isn't relief. Not completely. It's something much more complicated. A mix of grief, guilt, and a quiet, unfamiliar sense of space. Because when you step away from what once defined you, there's a moment, sometimes a long one, where everything feels empty. Not the painful emptiness of neglect, but a different kind, a blank space where something new is supposed to grow, even if you don't yet know what that something is. And standing in that space can feel terrifying, because for the first time, you're not reacting. You're not surviving. You're not playing a role. You're just there. And that raises a question that's both freeing and unsettling. If you're no longer who they needed you to be, then who are you allowed to become? Whoa, because for most of your life, that question was never yours to answer. When you cut off your family, the world doesn't suddenly become peaceful. In fact, it often becomes louder. Not externally, but inside your mind. There are days when the guilt creeps in quietly, like a shadow at dusk. You remember the good moments, the rare kindness, the laughter that made it feel, even briefly, like things were okay. And your mind begins to rewrite the story, softening the edges, blurring the pain. You start to wonder if you were too harsh. If maybe you should have stayed. If maybe love was there, just hidden in ways you failed to see. But healing isn't about denying the good. It's about finally allowing yourself to acknowledge the full truth, the good and the harm, the love and the absence, the connection and the cost. Because for a long time you were taught to only focus on one side. To be grateful, even when it hurt. To stay loyal, even when it broke you. To keep the connection alive, even if it meant losing yourself in the process. And now, for the first time, you're learning something different. You're learning that love without safety isn't really love. That connection without respect isn't really connection. That being, family, doesn't automatically mean being healthy for each other. This shift in perspective doesn't happen overnight. It unfolds slowly, like your eyes adjusting to a new kind of light. At first, it's uncomfortable. You begin to see patterns you once ignored. You notice how often your boundaries were crossed, how often your voice was dismissed, how often your needs were treated like inconveniences instead of something worthy of care. And with that awareness comes a different kind of pain. Not the pain of being hurt, but the pain of realizing how long you tolerated it. But within that pain, there's also something else. Something quieter, something steady, a sense of clarity. Because once you see things as they truly are, you can't unsee them, and that clarity becomes the foundation of something new. Not bitterness, not resentment, but understanding. You start to realize that the people who hurt you were often shaped by their own wounds. That they, too, may have grown up with empty wells, invisible walls, and emotional languages they were never taught how to speak. And while that doesn't excuse the harm, it explains the pattern. It helps you see that their inability to love you the way you needed was never a reflection of your worth. It was a limitation of their capacity. And this is where something powerful begins to happen. You stop chasing what was never truly available. You stop trying to earn what should have been freely given. You stop returning to the empty well, hoping this time it will finally be full. Instead, you begin to build your own source. This is the part of the journey that no one really prepares you for, the rebuilding. Because when you walk away from what hurt you, you're also walking toward something unknown. You have to learn what safety feels like. You have to discover what healthy boundaries look like. You have to figure out how to trust yourself. After years of being taught to doubt your own feelings. And it's not easy. There will be moments when loneliness hits harder than expected. Moments when you question if distance was worth it. Moments when you feel like you've lost more than you've gained. But slowly, something begins to shift. You start noticing the peace in your environment. The way your body feels less tense. The way your thoughts become quieter. The way you no longer have to shrink yourself just to exist. And in that space, something begins to grow. A new sense of self. Not the version of you that was shaped by expectations, roles, or survival, but the version of you that exists without needing to be anyone else. You start to choose relationships differently. You begin to recognize red flags you once ignored. You learn that real connection doesn't feel like walking on eggshells, it feels like being able to breathe. And maybe, for the first time, you experience what it means to be seen. Not for who you pretend to be, but for who you truly are. And that changes everything. Because once you've felt that kind of connection, even briefly, you understand something deeply. You were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong people. Healing, then, isn't about erasing the past. It's about redefining your relationship with it. It's about accepting that some chapters don't get closure, some questions don't get answers, and some people don't become who you needed them to be, and still choosing to move forward anyway. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with quiet self-respect, with the understanding that protecting your peace is not selfish, it's necessary. That walking away is not weakness, it's courage. And that's sometimes the most loving thing you can do, is to stop allowing yourself to be hurt in the name of loyalty. Because at the end of the day, this was never just about leaving them, it was about returning to yourself. To the parts of you that were silenced, to the feelings that were dismissed, to the identity that was shaped around survival instead of truth. And now, standing in that space you once feared, you begin to realize something profound. You didn't lose your family. You found your boundaries. You didn't break the connection. You broke the cycle. And maybe, just maybe, that was the point all along. So if you're here, carrying the weight of a decision that no one else seems to understand, know this. You are not cold. You are not ungrateful. You are not broken. You are someone who chose to stop abandoning themselves. And that choice, as painful as it is the beginning of a different kind of life. One where love doesn't have to hurt to be real. One where your voice doesn't have to be silenced to be accepted. One where you are allowed to exist, fully, honestly, and without fear. And even if the path feels lonely right now, it won't always be. Because every step you take toward yourself is a step closer to the kind of connection you were always meant to have. If this story resonated with you, if it felt like something you've been carrying in silence, then maybe, just maybe, you're not as alone as you think.